It was a difficult day at work, to say the least. My boss, Juliet, forgot about the meeting with Dunstan and Fitzgerald, and I was left to deal with the consequences of a failed and disastrous agreement. Our team worked for months on the D&F acquisition, which was expected to bring our company over $15 million, but it all fell apart due to Juliet's forgetfulness. I can't say that I don't understand part of it. Juliet's marriage to Brad was on the verge of divorce, and the reasons for this were terrible. She was broken, devastated, shocked, and it had been like that for the last 6 weeks. She had been like the walking dead ever since she caught Brad in bed with her mother. Now, not only was her marriage dead or dying, but so was her parents' marriage, and she still had not received even a hint of an apology from either of the two hypocritical offenders. After the meeting with D&F fell through, I tried my best to convince Henry Dunstan Jr. of our commitment to the company. But how can you prove your commitment to a multimillion-dollar deal if you cannot come to important and scheduled negotiations? Juliet was sent home. Frankly, she should have been removed from leading the project immediately after her world collapsed, and it was the senior management's fault. I spent the day with Jarvis Rodwell and Emily Pinter, two managers of our Eastern Division, trying to work out a new strategy from the remnants of the proposal to salvage something from the wreckage. It was almost 8 p.m. when Emily decided to finish work, at least until tomorrow. Go home, Renee, have a rest. There is no point in continuing now. We will have to reconsider everything, but I am pretty sure that if we have another chance, I will recommend you to lead the project. Emily was older than me. She was in her 50s and had soft gray hair that framed her once beautiful face. It was now gaunt and wrinkled, the reward of a lifetime of stress and corporate maneuvering. Jarvis agreed with her assessment and soon called his family, saying he would be home soon. Family. Oh yes, I forgot to tell William that I was late at work because of all this. I quickly took out my phone and tried to call him to apologize, but the call went to voicemail. I took my things and hurried to the car. I had a drive of just under an hour from the northern outskirts of Sydney to my home on the Central Coast, but that would only be if the traffic was favorable. In the car, I began the drive home, repeatedly dialing William's number and my home number. But there was no answer to both numbers. I sighed. Maybe he had left the house, or was working in the basement, or maybe he was just offended. This wasn't the first time I'd forgotten to report a late return, and it was already causing friction in our relationship. Don't get me wrong, my husband wasn't jealous of my job, position, or success. He didn't think I was cheating on him or would cheat on him. No, his irritation was the lack of respect, as he called it. All he wanted was for me to let him know so he wouldn't wait for dinner in vain or worry that I might get into an accident. Accidents were not uncommon on the roads I traveled on, especially at night, and if there was an accident on the M1, it could cause many hours of delays. It was about 8:45 when I left the highway, and about 9 p.m. when I arrived in Gosford, where we lived. William still wasn't answering my calls, and now I was starting to worry. Our house was small, although we could afford a larger one, but that's what we wanted now. We have discussed the possibility of moving to larger housing, but have not yet decided where to move. Will we stay on the Central Coast, move to Sydney, or perhaps one of the western suburbs? It depended on what we were going to do with our career plans. William worked in Newcastle, which was an hour's drive north of us. We were trying to figure out our plans because we were also considering starting a family. He turned 32 this year, and I was already 34. Time was running out, and conversations about these plans took up almost all of our free time over the past few months. They wore us out on top of the constant travel. Our time was precious, and what we did have was spent in stressful discussions. I parked at the house and noticed that almost all the lights in the house were turned off or dimmed. Only in the bedroom there was a bright light. I saw a bright orange shade behind the curtains. He must have gotten tired of waiting and went to bed, probably to read or watch TV. I hurried into the house and called. "Will, I'm home. I'm really sorry." I quickly threw my laptop bag and jacket onto the sofa and headed towards the bedroom. Maybe I can make amends, I thought. It had been a few weeks since we had made love, considering the stress we were both under. I smiled to myself. Yes, I was going to rock his world and mine. William? My heart sank. There, in my bed, in my house. No. William lay half covered with sheets. His body seemed covered in a layer of sweat. His hair was damp and tangled. It was clear that he was naked, as was the woman lying next to him. She was gorgeous, lying on top of the sheets, wrapped around my husband. Deep, shiny red hair, skin pale and perfectly smooth, long legs ending in firm buttocks, and two very large, very perfect breasts. Like William, she too was covered in sweat. Her beautiful hair stuck to her body in large, damp strands. "Hello, honey," she said to me with an exaggerated and seductive intonation. "We thought you'd be back sooner and couldn't wait." I'm sure I looked like an idiot standing there with my mouth open trying to formulate words. But there was no sound, although my jaws worked up and down, like in a silent movie. I felt dizzy. We haven't made love in weeks. Or months. My mind became foggy. I grabbed the door frame to keep from falling. William stirred and looked at me with a sarcastic smirk on his face. "Hi, Renee. I'd like to introduce you to Melody. Melody, this is my wife, Renee. Melody and I." I didn't let him finish his sentence. "Get out! Get out now!" I screamed, regaining my voice and filling it with righteous anger and indignation. "Get out of my house and take your bitch with you." My face was in tears. My vision was blurry, and I was literally seeing red. I was afraid that I might rupture a blood vessel in one or both eyes, and that I could see through the blood. My heart was beating so fast and hard that I could hear it beating in my ears, and my breathing became labored and hoarse. "Get out!" I turned and ran. Even though I told them to leave, I was the one who ran. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do. But suddenly, as I reached for the car, headlights appeared, pulling into our driveway. I blinked and cursed. They were blocking my exit. I started screaming and pouring out my pain, and I became vaguely aware that the exterior lights of several neighboring houses were starting to turn on, and one of the neighbors was already moving in my direction. It was late, there were young families around, and I was clearly disturbing them and their children's sleep. And then, before I knew it, William and his big-breasted bitch walked past me. They were dressed and heading to the car. I squinted into the headlights and noticed that it was William's older sister, Belle, who was driving the car. She waved at me sadly, with a sad expression on her face. I knew Belle before William. She was the one who introduced us. She was a good friend and a great mother-in-law to me. But now, here she is, as if in order to pick up the traitors. I gave her the middle finger and swore at her for good measure, even as I continued to curse at William and Melody. As a sign of my gratitude for the betrayal, I grabbed a stone from the flower bed next to me and threw it at the car, but my aim was poor and it disappeared into the darkness. Then, just as suddenly and abruptly as my nightmare began, it ended. Belle pulled the car out of the driveway and they drove away. A neighbor came up to me. She was an elderly lady whom I knew by sight and whom I always greeted, but I did not know her name. She took one look at me and then pulled me into a big, loving hug. "Everything will be okay, baby," she said softly, calming me, stroking my head with her hand. "Everything will be fine." I swore, calling William all the dirty names she could think of, and a few she made up on the spot. And when there were no more curses left to throw at my unfaithful husband, I cried. I cried for the love I lost. I cried about the children we won't have. I cried about the wasted years. And she cried about the insensitivity of William's betrayal. When I didn't show up for work the next day, I got a call from a worried and nervous Emily. It was 10 a.m. when she called, and since there had been no accidents or major delays on the southbound road, she assumed I wasn't going to come, and given the D and F fiasco yesterday and the problems with Juliet, she was on edge. She barely started asking if everything was okay, ending with just a stern greeting, when I started pouring out my heart and soul. I caught him. I caught that bastard cheating. They were here, waiting for me, wanting me to see them. Oh God, what should I do? They were having sex, hoping I'd catch them. Emily, help me, oh God, help me. I always said I was lucky, and Emily knew that I thought William walked on water. Everyone knew that I loved my husband. I adored him. I thought he felt the same. Oh, what a fool I was. What an idiot I was. Another one. Her words were full of despair and sadness. Before her personal problems, Juliet was an exemplary employee, valued, reliable, and loved. I considered myself the same. Now Juliet's productivity had fallen off a cliff, and Emily was worried the same might happen to me. I'm leaving now, Renee. I'll be at your house soon. Don't worry about work. We'll figure something out. I muttered something, not sure what it was, and hung up the call, throwing the phone on the bed. I slept in the guest room on a cot, not wanting to go near the scene of William's betrayal and cruelty. Now I wandered back to the bedroom, to the crime scene. I needed a change of clothes. I looked at the bed with disgust. The sheets were wrinkled. My sheets, they were my sheets. Beautiful gold satin sheets he bought me for my last birthday, and it was on these sheets that he decided to commit his adultery. Tears flowed again, and I screamed in rage. Damn bitch! Damn William! Damn you! I grabbed my clothes, and as I did so I noticed that on William's nightstand was his wedding ring, cut in half and carelessly tossed aside. This was the ring I chose for him. We chose rings for each other to exchange 6 years ago. It was a beautiful yellow and rose gold ring. It took weeks to develop the design with a jeweler, and it was perfect. And now it was coldly cut in two and simply thrown away like my heart. I was furious. Things were thrown, smashed, destroyed, broken, and destroyed. I destroyed everything I could find. I threw his clothes outside and filled them with a full bottle of methyl alcohol from our cleaning supplies before lighting them with a match. All his clothes were burning with a bright flame, and I laughed at the fire. His precious collection of comics, his books, his terrible taste in music, his CDs and DVDs collected over the years joined the fire, and his antique watch, so out of place for him, and yet so beloved, was thrown away through the glass figurines inherited from his grandmother and equally dear to him. I was still furious when Emily arrived and cautiously, timidly, looked into the house, seeing all the chaos and destruction I had caused. Renee, please don't do this. Let's go somewhere quiet, away from here, and talk. She held out her hand to me, pleading with me. Perhaps there was something murderous in my eyes, because there was fear in hers. Finally, my destructive rage died down. I nodded, and we left. We talked the rest of the day. Emily was a great listener, empathic and sincere, and she was wise, well, at least I think so now, from the height of time. I didn't hear much of what she said then, although the feelings that her words conveyed were full of love, compassion, and care. She tried to protect me. They failed Juliet, and they weren't going to make the same mistake with me, or at least that's how she put it. I have not attempted to contact my soon-to-be ex-husband, nor have I heard from William. I haven't heard from Belle. I haven't heard from anyone from this treacherous family. They rallied around him, and so be it, because if I had my way, I would have killed him brutally and declared that I still demanded restitution. The next day, after a sleepless night, I called my mother. The house looked like it was after a war or a natural disaster, and I lived among ruins and garbage. My mother could hardly believe it. William was like a son to her, just as he was to my father before he died. She always trusted William to take care of me, to protect me, and now he tore my heart out and laughed about it. I could barely talk to my mom. The call was long, but almost nothing was said except, "Oh God," and "Help me," and "Why?" Mum said she would come down from Wollongong that day and would stay with me until I was okay. My little sister often asked her to babysit her babies, which my mother had enjoyed doing since my father died, but now she was going to be with me. I cried with joy. For the first time since I found them in bed, I was happy. Mom and I had a wonderful relationship. After William, she was the person I trusted the most. And now, after William's betrayal, my mother was the only one I could rely on. Time passed slowly. My mother stayed with me for over a month. I had a week off, but I took another 2 weeks of regular vacation and 1 week of sick leave to spend time with her. We cleaned the house, removing all traces of William in the process, and just lived. I still haven't heard from William. No word from his family. My anger, my rage grew every day. How could this bastard do this to me? I trusted him unconditionally, loved him with all my heart, and he trampled me with complete disdain, almost as if he hated me. Finally, my mother couldn't stand it anymore and called Monica, William's mother, to find out what was going on. My marriage was over, there was no doubt about it, but there were still financial issues that needed to be sorted out. House, for example. William's car was still in the garage, although it now had a broken windshield and numerous dents all over its body. I didn't hear much of their conversation. My mother spoke behind a closed door so as not to upset me. But eventually she returned, with a strange expression on her face. He said sell the house or keep it. Looks like he's already agreed to give up his claims. He took some of the money, Monica thinks about 25%, and left the rest to you. Looks like he wants to get rid of you. I started cursing again. Who is this idiot to treat me like this? Why does he hate me so much? There is more here than we know, my mother continued. Monica seems heartbroken. Okay, I growled. I'm not talking about the marriage, although I know she's upset about it too. All she said, and said it over and over again, was, I'm sorry, dear, I'm so sorry. Nobody meant it. Tell Renee we're sorry, tell her we still love her. She shrugged, puzzled. It was a very strange conversation. My mother looked depressed as she continued. Monica said all the legal papers will be ready by the end of the week and asked me to tell you to live a good life. There were tears in her eyes. She got along very well with Monica. Since my father died, their friendship has only grown stronger, and now this. I don't think anyone in William's family approves or supports what he's done, but he is their son and brother. I know it's a wild hope, but if there's even the slightest chance, no matter how slight, could this marriage be restored? There was hope in her eyes, but I quickly shattered it on the sharp, jagged rocks of my new reality. I hope that damn bastard dies. As promised, the documents and legal papers arrived within the next week. The house was sold, William's car was sold. All that was left of his belongings was sold. The remaining funds were transferred to another account, which William did not have access to, and life moved on, albeit painfully. 9 months after I found William being a bitch in bed, I started dating again. It was difficult at first, I had serious trust issues. But my friends were there to support me. My healing was their goal, and they did everything they could to make it happen. No one heard or saw William, and no one spoke about him. His name was erased from records and blotted out of existence. I still had 3 months left before the divorce, and that was the only thing that was bothering me now. 2 months after that, I went out on my first date with Travis. He was tall, handsome, and a well-mannered engineer. Where William was serious, Travis was cheerful. Where William was handsome, Travis was masculinely handsome. I began to see a new future, although it was moving slowly. My friends were there to make sure that my heart, which was slowly healing, would no longer be so terribly vulnerable. We weren't intimate until the 7th date, which was the first time I'd been with a man since William. It was beautiful, caring, and loving. Travis treated me like a porcelain princess. His care for me was obvious. I cried in his arms, tears of joy. Maybe I can find a new love. I prayed that I could. After 12 months had passed, my lawyer began the divorce process, and just like that, it was all over. I still haven't heard a word, not a single one. William tore my heart out, trampled it into dust, and seemed to simply disappear. He cared so little about me that I did not exist for him, just as he did not exist for me. My only apology was a card and an apology from Belle, which I promptly tossed in the trash, covered in the leftover lasagna I'd left in the fridge over a week ago. The letter from Belle fueled my anger even more. She was my best friend, and now she didn't exist for me. It was the first thing I heard from her, and it was devastating to remember what else was lost in the murder of my marriage. Time went on, and the wounds continued to heal. I had moments of fear with Travis as my trust in him was tested. Emily retired and Juliet, who was back on her feet, was now promoted to her role and I in turn took her place. On my 37th birthday, my world became right again. Renee, my life without you has no meaning. I want to grow old with you, and I want to have a family with you. Will you marry me? Will you make me the happiest and luckiest person in the world? Will you be the mother of my children? My beautiful man, the hero who saved me, Travis proposed, and he did it in front of all my friends and family at a surprise party he threw. I screamed. All my friends screamed. My mom screamed. My sister and her kids screamed, although I think they just joined in because all the adults were doing it. The men applauded. Yes, yes, oh 1,000 times yes. The men cheered loudly, applauding the happy man. Let's start making the baby right now, I demanded, thus ending the party as soon as I kicked out the guests and dragged my now fiancé to bed, shedding my clothes along the way. But all good things come to an end, and there will always be some kind of trouble. My trouble was Melody. A couple of weeks after Travis proposed to me, I ran into her. I never forgot her, nor the way she looked. Her image, this whole scene was still burning in my subconscious. Travis and I had just finished dinner and were about to head home to continue the process of conceiving a child when I literally bumped into her while leaving the restaurant. She was with a man I had never seen before and looked tenderly into his eyes when we collided. Suddenly thoughts of revenge, or at least some kind of retribution, flashed through my head. My right hand was rising towards her before she realized who I was. The blow hit her square in the cheek, knocking her off her feet and leaving a bright red mark and a split lip. "You fucking family-destroying bitch," I screamed at her, now lying on the ground in confusion. My attack stunned everyone in the restaurant, Melody, her companion, and Travis. I stepped forward and kicked her hard in the stomach, knocking the wind out of her before Travis and her friend intervened and held me back. "Bitch," I screamed again, spitting at her, hatred burning deep inside me. "You dirty street bitch." So much pain suddenly bubbled to the surface, pain that I hadn't had time to let go of since I hadn't seen it or William or any of his family in the past few years. And while destroying all of William's things was a release, it was nothing compared to facing my tormentor face to face. "Let me go, Travis, let me go. That's the bitch that slept with William. This is the bitch I told you about." I struggled against his tight grip, while Melody's companion crouched down, shielding her from further blows, and at the same time trying to help her get up. Her companion was stunned and shocked by my sudden attack, to say the least. He looked from Melody to me and back, then repeated the motion again. "You slept with my husband," I screamed again, swinging a wild kick in her direction. The blow missed and hit her friend, knocking him to his knees. Melody finally rose to her feet, albeit unsteadily. I heard the noise around us, and of course I knew I would end up on YouTube or TikTok or some other platform by the end of the night, but I didn't care. Honestly, I'd welcome it, especially if it showed Melody's bitch face. "This is true?" Her companion turned to her. There was a look of disgust on his face that I enjoyed. Fine, let her relationship be ruined just like mine. "Damn it, it's true," I hissed. "The bitch slept with him in my house, and then they both made fun of me." Melody shook her head, not so much for me as for her companion. "No, that's not true," she then turned to me. "We never slept together. It wasn't in the plans, it was never the plan. I can't believe no one told you. It's been years and you." Suddenly her face became even paler and she looked terrible. Her voice trembled with sadness. "You don't know, do you?" "I don't know what?" Travis asked, holding me tightly but still tenderly, his arms wrapping around me and comforting me at the same time. "What doesn't she know?" It's not for me to say," she said, tears in her eyes. Oh God, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. We never slept together. He never slept with anyone else. I don't think he slept with anyone else at all. Oh God, I'm so sorry. It had to be. They told me that it would all be over, that they would tell you everything." She looked down, unable to look me in the eyes. "What the hell is going on?" asked her companion, looking around in confusion. At that moment, a police car pulled up and two officers got out, raising their hands as if trying to defuse the situation. People pointed at me, indicating that I was the aggressor. Travis held me tightly, and I was afraid of being arrested for assault. However, Melody, my cruel tormentor, the terrible succubus who ruined my marriage by seducing my husband, turned to them, waving them off. It's okay, it was an accident." The impact mark on her face and the tears in her eyes told a different story, and the policewoman asked to speak to Melody alone for a minute while her partner looked at us suspiciously. The couple returned a few minutes later, and the two police officers discussed the situation. "Are you sure?" Officer Melody asked, receiving an affirmative nod in response. "Okay then. But you," she turned to me, "go home, and I don't want to see or hear from you anymore." I smiled, although the smile trembled on my lips and looked more like a grimace, I'm sure. "Yes, officer," I said before Travis led me away. Behind her, Melody shouted one last time, "I'm sorry." My mood was ruined that night, and Travis had to do everything he could to calm me down. My nerves were on edge, my rage was boiling, and my mind was spinning. I hate her and him. Just more lies, and why? What did I do to deserve this? Why do they hate me so much? What did I do? Am I that terrible? I was shaking, I was stammering, my fists were clenched into burning balls, and I later realized that I had dug my long nails into my hands, leaving large red marks. Travis, God bless him, did his best to comfort me, assuring me that everything was okay. But I saw in his eyes that he was furious. We haven't made love all week. Bad thoughts kept haunting my dreams, nightmares kept haunting my waking thoughts. I saw two unfaithful lovers entwined every time I closed my eyes. I cried at the slightest provocation, flared up, and my distrust of Travis grew again, albeit unfoundedly. Just when I thought I could trust him again, my subconscious would remind me that I trusted William too, and look how that turned out. It was a Saturday afternoon, a little over 2 weeks after the confrontation with Melody outside the restaurant. Travis went to see a friend about his car and was gone all morning. I started having those feelings again. I tried to trust him. I wanted to trust. I loved him and knew that he loved me, but I could not get rid of the feeling of suspicion that clouded my thoughts. I picked up the phone to call him. I needed to hear his voice. In fact, I needed to find out where he was, what he was doing, and who he was with. As soon as I pressed his number on the speed dial, I heard the sound of his car in the driveway. I rushed to the door. I needed him to hold me, to tell me that everything was okay. But when I approached, I saw another car behind him, and my heart sank when I saw who it was. Belle, my ex-sister-in-law, my ex-girlfriend. She looked nervous as she got out of the car, but Travis was right next to her, carefully guiding her without touching her. His head was slightly bowed, and he spoke quietly. I saw his lips move, but did not hear what he said. Belle nodded her agreement several times before casting a wary glance at the house. Our eyes met, and I saw fear, anxiety, sadness. There was an expression of worry on her face, at least. She didn't want to be here, so why was she here? Travis entered the house with Belle. She stopped at the threshold and looked at me before finding something more interesting on the floor at her feet. "What is she doing here?" I growled. "She hasn't spoken to me for almost 3 years. She supported her idiot brother over me, just like their whole fucking family." She suddenly burst into tears and ran out. Travis gave me a terrible, tortured look and ran after her. "Belle, please, Belle." But it was too late. She jumped into her car and sped off. Travis looked after her, leaving the car with longing. His shoulders slumped. He leaned against a large tree in our front yard, and I saw him shudder. He cried. What did he hope to achieve by bringing this bitch here? I slammed the door and bolted it. Well, to hell with him too, I thought. To hell with him too. Travis was knocking on the door when he realized I had locked it. He knocked and begged me for hours before I finally gave in and let him in. He tried to hug me, but I pushed him away. "I'm sorry," he finally admitted after a long time of trying to get me to look at him. "I'm sorry I didn't talk to you about this. but I don't regret doing it. Finally, he seemed to have had enough of my nonsense, and he took me firmly by the shoulders and turned me towards him. Why did you bring her here? Were you going to have sex with her in front of me? Should I let her laugh at me and mock me? He was stunned. Why would I ever do something like that to you? I love you. So will William, I muttered, until I stopped. Has she ever bullied you? Any of them? I shook my head. I haven't heard a word from them, not one. Then it's time to do it. He gave me a big, warm hug, and I melted into his body, resting my head on his broad chest. I need to call her. I hope she hasn't blocked my number yet. This is important. You need it to move on. You need to close this issue. For you and for us. You need to bury what happened. Yes, it was terrible, but it was in the past. For our future together, this must be resolved. It kills you, Renee. It hurts us. I nodded my head slightly, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough. He gently tilted my head up and planted a warm, loving kiss on my lips. I love you, Renee. I always will. He walked away and took out his phone. He begged, looked lost and desperate. This was a battle he wasn't winning. Finally, in desperation, I grabbed his phone. I could hear Belle crying. She was absolutely sobbing. It was painful and pathetic. Why was she sad? She supported my ex, her brother, in destroying my marriage and completely humiliating me. Belle, I began, and suddenly I heard her suck in air, swallow, and then there was silence. I decided to be more generous, not for myself, but for Travis, for the man I loved. Belle, I'm sorry. Renee. Her voice was hoarse, her sound weak. Not the strong woman I knew. Then the phone went off. She hung up on us. I looked at Travis as I handed the phone back to him. She hung up. There is something more to this, Renee, much more. I did some digging before asking you to marry me, and I continued my search last week. Things weren't working out, so I went to Belle a couple days ago and introduced myself. I spoke to her briefly. I knew she was a good friend to you and also William's sister, so I thought she was the best person for this. Renee, this is killing her. I didn't go into her house, but I was able to see a little bit of the inside when I was there at her front door. Renee, she still has a large photograph of you two hanging up in a prominent place. She wouldn't have kept it if she hated you. She would have removed it long ago. I don't think she wanted to end your friendship. So why? I don't know, Renee. I don't know. Travis convinced me that I needed a psychologist. This was something I had been advised to do before, but I always shied away from it. I wasn't crazy. I didn't need a psychiatrist. I just needed people in my life who I loved and who loved me back. On Monday, at Travis's urging, I made some calls and set up an appointment with my therapist to get a mental health evaluation. Tuesday night, when I got home from work, I was shocked to see Belle's car in our driveway. My stomach twisted with nerves, and I cautiously approached the house. Belle was sitting at the dinner table with Travis. They had an open bottle of wine and 3 glasses on the table. Their conversation, quiet as it was, immediately stopped when I entered. Travis looked up at me, his cheeks shiny with tears. I'll leave you two alone, he said solemnly, standing up. No, please. I reached out to him. We are a team. We do everything together. He looked at me, then at Belle, and back at me, and sat back down with a sigh. Belle looked up at me. She was crying too. She extended a trembling hand towards me. I didn't take it. Her lips trembled, and she lowered her head in grief. Rainey, she began. Her voice was so weak. William never. Oh damn, help me, please. She begged to no one and everyone at the same time. I shouldn't be here, I promised him. We all promised. He doesn't want you to know. Know what, Belle? William is dying, Renee. He has a few days left, maybe weeks if he's lucky. I wanted him dead, didn't I? When he broke my heart, when he tore it into pieces along with his bitch. When he threw me away so cruelly without a care in the world. And, I answered coldly, my heart ached, but I kept the feeling deep inside where it couldn't hurt me. My mind would go into battle, my heart would be weak, so I left it in the trenches. She looked at me in shock. Travis was stunned. Rainy. His voice was harsh, his tone was stern, and his gaze made me tremble a little. You don't understand, Renee. It was Bell again. He never cheated on you. He never wanted to hurt you, but he felt like he had no choice. She was twisting her arms, and now that I looked at her more closely, I noticed that she had lost weight. Her face was gaunt, with large dark circles under her eyes and slightly sunken cheeks. I know what I saw, Belle. They were at my house having sex when I found them. My thoughts returned to the darkest moment of my life, even worse than when my father died. She shook, all over her body and head. She was so sad, broken. No, Renee, that's what he wanted you to think. What he wanted you to see. He never slept with her. It was all a trick. It was a trick, a cruel trick, but, oh, Renee, he had the best intentions. We tried to dissuade him, but he made us promise. He loved you, Renee, with everything he had. He still loves you. So why did he leave me? Travis squeezed my hand. Why did you hurt me so badly? Belle's tears flowed freely down her face, falling onto the table. Because he didn't want you to see him die. She suddenly jumped up and ran out of the house again. I was stunned. I couldn't speak for what seemed like an eternity. Travis held my hands in his, crying with me for me. I have to see him. I was sobbing and Travis came to me and hugged me tenderly, giving me his love as a shield, like armor to protect me. I will find out all the details. I heard the pain in his voice. But was it the pain he felt for me, for William, or for himself? I was robbed of the last years of my marriage to the man I loved, by this man himself, and he hurt me terribly. But if what Belle said was true, was it the lesser of two evils? Did William sacrifice himself, his last years, for me, for my future? Did he sacrifice for himself so he wouldn't have to watch me lose the man I loved? I was shocked. I was completely confused. My heart broke again. Travis still held me, and we cried together. William was in a private hospital in Newcastle for palliative care. Travis kept his word and found out all the details. On Thursday, we went there to see him. I was nervous, scared. Belle and I spoke that morning. She was glad that the mystery was finally solved, even if it meant breaking the promise she made to her dying brother. It had been eating away at her for the past few years. It was killing them all, just as surely as cancer was killing William. I don't remember much about the hospital. It was small but well-staffed and had that strange, disinfecting smell that hospitals have. It looked like a normal hospital scaled down. William's room was small and crowded when we arrived. His parents were with him, as were his remaining two grandparents, Belle with her husband and their children. He was exhausted. I barely recognized him connected to many devices, tubes and wires. His mother was crying, holding his hand in hers. She was small, but her hands seemed gigantic compared to his withered ones. His skin was pale and damp in appearance, and his eyes seemed to have difficulty focusing on anything. Soon our presence was noticed, and the silence in the room became even more deaf. Travis gently nudged me forward before walking out himself, leaving us alone. Everyone else slowly started to come out too, his mother hugging me tightly, whispering thank you and sorry in a quiet tone. Everyone touched me on the shoulder or arm with compassion as they walked out. Belle nodded and silently thanked me. Soon only William remained, alone and weak on the bed, and I, standing but bent over, wounded. He was so small. The man I loved with all my heart, the one who had broken him so cruelly, was now just a shell in front of me. Tears streamed down his face as he looked at me, and I noticed that on the bedside table there was a photo of me in a wedding dress from our wedding day, and on his left hand was the ring that I had made for him, the one that I was sure he cut it and threw it away with contempt. He saw that I was looking at the ring, and in a hoarse voice, almost a whisper, he said, "The other one was a copy. I could never hurt him ever." Suddenly, he started coughing, and I panicked. William pointed to a cup on the nightstand, and I handed it to him, just water. He brought it to his lips with trembling hands and took a sip to clear his throat, then handed it back to me. The broken man in front of me tried to say something, but his voice became even quieter, and I couldn't hear him. The noise from the machines was too loud, his voice was too weak, my heart was beating too fast. I leaned towards him and soon found myself kissing his forehead, his cheeks, and then his lips. I repeated his name over and over again. "Renee, are you a married woman now, or will you be soon?" he said, croaking. "Speaking of which, is he here?" I nodded, still kissing him and holding his hands. His whole body was just skin and bones, fragile and weak and vulnerable. "Bring him, please." His smile was as bright as his condition, and it lit a fire in my heart and soul. I called out to Travis, who soon cautiously entered the room, feeling unsure. He was quiet and kept his hands behind his back. William motioned for him to come over, and he did. My new love was dating my first love. My fiancé was dating my ex-husband, the man who saved me and the man who destroyed me. Travis seemed like a giant, huge, tall and wide, and took up all the space in the room, and the person lying in front of him, but he was scared. William extended a trembling hand, his hand trembling. Travis took it carefully, and then William put my hand in Travis's. "Love her always," he said, then lowered his head back and closed his eyes. I was shaking and fearing the worst. But Travis pointed to the heart rate monitor, which was still beeping. William just fell asleep. We left the room and joined the assembled relatives. Everyone started hugging me and Travis. They apologized, but there was time for that later. Now I let out a flood of tears again. My husband never stopped loving me. When I was at the very bottom, I realized that he was even lower. He hurt me to save me. Bell later told me that William knew I wanted children, but as time was running out, he wanted to make sure I could move on with my life as soon as possible. That way, in addition to saving me from watching him die and the terrible pain of it, I wouldn't be wasting time that I could have been using to find someone to spend my life with who would father my children. William didn't want to hurt me, but he felt he had no choice. He felt that in order for me to have the love I needed, my love for him had to die. I was furious with him for a while, even after he died 2 days later. It should have been my decision to deal with his illness, but he took that away from me. I understood the logic of his action. It all came down to something simple. Logic. I was 37 years old when William died. I'm getting married again soon and trying to have a baby. If I had waited until William died, I would have lost several years. I would have had to grieve for the man I loved and then try to recover. Perhaps I would never have succeeded. It was an altruistic gesture of love that shook me to the core, even if I hated that he made this decision alone. For a long time, I believed that he hated me, burned with hatred for me, but that was not the case, and I cried fresh tears. I'm turning 40. My son, William, named after my first husband, just turned 1 and is adored by 5 grandparents. You might think I was being insensitive to my new husband, Travis, by naming my son that name, but it was Travis's suggestion, even if he had to take the time to convince me. If it weren't for William Renee, who gave you away when he needed you most, we would never have met and our son would never have been born. I know you still love him, but I know you're in love with me. I don't feel threatened by his ghost, but it would be a lovely gesture, I think, and honestly, I like the name. And so it was. It took time for William's family to overcome the guilt they felt, and I'm not sure they all ever got over it. But I had the love of a good man once, before his own death, and now I have the love of an equally good man, whom I will love until my death. And I forgive them all. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.